There's two main things I think about every time I take a base, especially in ZVT. I'm going to be focusing on ZVT the most because it's absolutely the most relevant. ZVP and ZVZ is a lot different. There's a lot of different rules. So when you think about Pillars of Gold, for example, you either take this as the third or this is the third, right? And if, for example, you took this as the third, you have a couple options as a fourth base, naturally, right? But think about your experiences, like push paths on this map. Usually, if you go this fourth over here, it fucking sucks. Your life is pain because they're taking the triangle and they're just gonna rally it down and it's gonna suck. That's also why you don't really want to take this base. The only time taking a line base is good is if they also took the line base, or if you're really confident in holding pushes, maybe you could take it, or like something's blocking this base, you could take it, but it's really not a lot of benefit, just kind of like turns into like an okay situation. So to me, like no matter what, this base is going to be taken, whether it's the third or the fourth. And I've seen a couple Terrans, a lot of good Terrans, push here for their first two medevacs, and even with tank pushes. But after that, I really have never seen a successful push into this area in my life. It's always up here with the rocks behind this cliff, or you know, later on it becomes like kind of in this area and stuff like that. So the way I've seen taking bases on this map is you might as well take this as a third anyways. If this is the best primo spot, take a base, you might as well start here, because taking the base here first doesn't get you anything. And if they still push here, despite you not taking the base, you're like so far away from danger. Because you're going to get creep to just about here anyways by default. So if they medevac push, tank push, they're getting nothing from it because you're all the way over here. And if they do push over here, well, it's better to have a fully finished base, saturated base, and be mining and all that jazz than you just taking your fourth and you're getting tank push, right? And not only that, but also establishing this base makes this triangle way stronger because you get this box. I like to call it the box between the dead space. When you box out the dead space, it makes this way less of a problem. You have spores in the key locations. You cover all your options and it just makes it way less unsafe. You're super quick if you have all these bases up here, which you could say like is making the tank push even harder. But in this case, on Pillars of Gold, to be honest, I feel like if you take this base and you're actually getting the creep to justify it, if you have the creep and they have to siege here, I think that's pretty rough for Terran, because either they have their Marines up here and they're walking up with it, or they're just sitting here sieged, but they don't really have much to do. You know, they have to run over here and stuff like that. So it just ends up causing a lot of problems. And I feel like there's a lot of instances like this where if you just take the base that they want to push anyways, like the area they want to push first, you actually defend it so much easier just because you're getting creep from the get-go instead of having to take it from your fourth. And we'll go through a couple different maps. If you played, or rather, if you watched me play on Nightshade, you already know what this is all about. This is the same exact Nightshade tumor, and it's just exactly the same. Nightshade and Romanticide are just so similar in the fact that you have this jump spot. Now, while I would love to talk about this tumor all the time and how great it is, the real reason I think it's important on Romanticide especially, way more than Nightshade ever was this third was not nearly as bad on Nightshade. And it is terrible on Romanticide because of these minerals. I remember actually talking to McIntack and he was like, man, I hate Romanticide, it's the worst. I'm like, why? It's whatever. He was like, well, ZVT, I cannot deal with these tank pushes behind the mineral line. And I'm like, why are you taking that third? All I do is I take this as a third and then go right up here for a fourth base, and I don't have to worry about any tank pushes. And since I take bases like this, generally the attacking path ends up going straight through the middle and attacking here. So there's not a lot of going down here and then clearing creeper or you know, down all the way here. So it's way too much of a detour. So I end up having one or two tumors down here, and then by the time I take my fifth base, you know, we're already on the high ground, maybe even below here if we're doing really good. And it ends up being actually like way safer of a base by then. even though these minerals still exist. I don't even bother taking out the minerals. But because I've established so many more bases and economy, it just becomes irrelevant. So I think this example in particular really highlights how sometimes it's a problem when it's just your third base taking a certain location, but can become way easier if you let it wait till your fourth or your fifth. Just let your economy, let your natural power spike through just being a zerg player just carry you through taking a base. I hate calling all these maps other maps, but this is fucking Simulacrum, and I will fight till the grave prove it. It's just with bigger ramps. So the big thing with Lightshade is, well, I mean, the tumor is just, I take triangle and then I do it over this cliff, which is cool. I don't think it's amazing, or I don't think it's necessary 100%. You could totally take a tumor here and then take this spot, right? I don't think the third, to be clear, I don't think these thirds are only good because of the tumors that I'm attaching with them. There usually is a spot for both sides. Sometimes there aren't. Like, I think maybe Romanticide might not have one, but I mean, you could totally do a tumor up here. I personally really like triangle in this situation because of how close it is. It's much closer, but there are similar things where you get up to here, and you'd have to tumor one more time to get on top of it, but it's pretty decent. It's a little further than Simulacrum, or we're preparing Simulacrum and Lightshade, but I think it's fine. The big thing that I really like about this map in particular, I really like taking this base. I took this base on Simulacrum, I thought it was super good. But when you take this base, and then this base, you're making the cage between all the different bases. And I really like the cage setup because usually I go Ling Bane, and I think if you're going Ling Bane heavy styles, you kind of need to cover everything with spores in some way. A good thing about taking triangle base is how you're expanding directly opposite of Terran. Because the best way for Terran to be expanding is boom, boom, boom. And then this fourth I think is very natural. I think this base is also pretty good for the high ground, but I much rather them take this base while that fourth while I take this fourth, than they take this fourth and I take this fourth. I think this is a danger zone. This is just scary as hell. I think it must be the cliff that scares the shit out of me. Because having a 2-2 timing while his shit is up here and I'm just trying to defend this base versus this base, man, I feel open. I feel free. I feel super good about having this high ground this far away while I take this base. And of course, we end up going back up here for a fifth base. This is, I think, a situation where this is a good example of me actually expanding towards a dead end, all things considered, for the sake of not having to deal with things like this. Because if I take this base, I guess you could, in theory, take this base, then this base is a fifth base. I think it's okay if you go Muta or Hydra or something, but Ling Bane, I think establishing the creep and then really locking this up is important, because the big problem is if you take this base as a fourth, they're going to be sitting here with Marines potentially. Like, you medevac drop in the main, you defend it, they go right over here, and they're sitting behind minerals. You're going to need some form of anti-air to shoo that away. Just having Ling Bane, you might get them away, but you're going to trade real badly. So I think this is a good example of like a decision I make just because I play a particular style, and if you played something with anti-air, you could take this as a fourth base. But in the end, 5 base is looking like this, for sure, in my mind. While having these two bases next to each other is really nice, the Terran base progression, being something like this is just way too difficult. If they take this base though, and then they do decide to keep going down, I think it's pretty nice having these two bases opened up, and you can just kind of expand, evac this. Hopefully after mining from it for a while. But it just kind of depends on if you take it as a fourth or fifth. The way I thought about this map was, okay, if you're taking line base, you get the spot on the top of the ramp. That's great. It took 4 tumors to get pretty nice coverage on top of here, right? You've established high ground with 4 tumors, which is great. And then now you can do whatever you want. Kill the rocks, whatever you need to do, you have control over the situation. So if you took this base, the only reason to take this base would be to establish the cage in between all these different bases, which this kind of counts as a cage. Even triangles could be the cage. But you wouldn't want to take this base as your fourth, just because it's much harder to get these tumors down here. And by the time you do it, like, you're gonna be hitting the first medevac timing, which I think is fine, but it's really not worth the effort when your base is literally in Africa, away from that. So I was thinking, surely this is the base if you're gonna take triangle. But man, was I wrong. Not only do you have a cliff up here to say hello to anybody going on the ramp, but there's a brush. You really can't tell what the hell is going on this side of the map. This top side ends up being a complete death trap. So I was like, okay, if going triangle and then this space is bad, and then taking triangle and then taking this space is okay, but not as good as taking the line base in terms of defensive capabilities, why would anyone ever take it? And I still don't know the answer. I would love for you guys to give me one, because I see very good players do this, and it's just, they'll take triangle and then they'll take this as the fourth, and it's just like, why? Whereas I think taking the line base and then taking this base is pretty decent. I think this is actually what I prefer personally, but even taking this base as a fourth, I think is better. The only problem is you don't have creep, so like this cage area becomes pretty vulnerable if you don't have Ling Bane, but I think if you're going Muta, it's fine. Go for it. Especially if you're going Muta, because they're probably going to go triangle, and you're going to be really close to them. And Hydra, I think you can get away with both. But Ling Bane, this is problematic. I think if you're going Ling Bane, or if you're going Roach Ravager, going line all the way down is kind of the move. If you take line base, taking this tumor is golden. It's such a good tumor. Triangle tumor isn't as good, so it's kind of I don't blame myself too much for fucking that up, but this would be a nice tumor spot, because then you can go up here. All right, bada bing bada boom. Here's the thing about base taking. I think the great thing about this base, if you're Ling Bane, is you have this all established, and I think taking this as a fourth base is just doom because of this high ground. I think there's a pretty common theme here between me avoiding high grounds, between Lightshade and what was that map we were just on? Submarine. This to me is like the problem on Death Aura, and my big goal is just to avoid it as much as I can. And I was taking this as the fourth base, but then I realized, man, this sucks not having creep established, and they can just jump from here to here, and then I can't do anything about it because I'm a Ling Bane player. This is why I think like maybe it doesn't matter as much if you're a Muta player or maybe even a Hydra player. I think Hydra players will still have trouble because the timing people get Hydra is generally later. It's not as quick as Muta. But either way, I do think there is some value in this base as a third, just because even if you are going Muta, because there's a lot of pushes that I get on this little cliff here, and they're kind of pushing down. And not only do I feel like it's not a big deal when you take the triangle as your third, because I have creep up here already, but I think it's really good if they don't go to this side of the map as much as possible, because while I'm creeping on the right side, I'm also kind of setting some tumors over on the left, and you know, we're getting our homies set up for our ultimately fifth base being here, because this base as a fifth is just dog, because this is such a great base for Terran that you know, it just very naturally will rally in. And even if they don't take this as a third, it's one or the other. It's either taking this triangle or you're taking the line base, and either way you're gonna be rallying super hard in this. I much rather take this base in the end, this guy for second round. But I think taking this as a fifth base is completely fine, because you get time to deal with the rocks, you get time to get creep spread. And then this is another example of like, I don't really like this base as a fourth, but as a fifth, it's completely fine, just because you have enough economy to break rocks to kind of overpower. Like flanking in general becomes actually pretty effective in this spot, where flanking is always effective in ZVT. But if this is like his marine tank timing and he's here and I'm trying to establish a fourth right now, like this sucks. Or like if I'm getting 2-2 timing, then you know, it's a marine tank, yada yada, and I don't quite have these rocks down, you know, my life is pain. But I pretty much consistently always get these bases. And I think this is the key to Death Aura for sure. And you know, maps like Death Aura will come and go, but it's the idea of you know, whether it's expanding away from the opponent and keeping as much distance as possible, whether it's staying away from cliffs and just delaying it until you actually have enough army or tech to deal with it, or just giving yourself an easier time versus drops and having fours in key positions. Because if this was my fourth base, for example, I go boom, 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 and this is my fourth, and then he medevac drops here, not only do I need enough units for my fourth base, but I need to be ready for him to go into my main at any moment. Whether that's a bunch of spores and probably queens if I really want to be safe, or that's a bunch of Lingbane. That's a huge commitment, because you can't have, for example, Lingbane here, enough for 2 medevacs, and be ready to go to defend any push up here or down here. You know, it's just a little bit too many places when you're just getting your fourth base. I think that's kind of been my main focus, just because I am a Lingbane player. Having bases that would be really problematic as fourth bases, as thirds instead, has solved so many problems. I did that on Ice and Chrome, did that in Death Aura. I think Pillars of Gold is like that in some ways, rather than for the triangle though, it's for the fourth base. Actually no, even for the triangle, it covers that too, because if you take the line and then what would be the triangle as a fourth, there's a very similar problem there, and it's just a nightmare when you don't have mutas to scoop them up. I think that's really, really huge. And you know, there's little things like creep and all that stuff, but I think just about playing what's most suited to your style.